So I thought for my first video, let's do ranking my, not ranking, let me take that. Let's do a list of my 10 favorite guitar solos. So I came up with a list, but my idea was this. I would just write down the first 10 guitar solos that I love in no particular order. So it isn't necessarily my top 10 really, because they're just the ones that came to me. And you know, if I was to do this tomorrow and come up with 10 guitar solos, it might be a different list. All right, off the top of my head. So my first one that comes to my mind is a solo that I just think is so unique and so cool. And it's from one of my absolute favorite bands, which, interestingly enough, a lot of my favorite bands today were not my favorite bands when I was a kid. So they've changed, a lot of them. Some of them still are and some aren't. But the band that these days I really just enjoy, and I think as you get older, you kind of look at music and everything a little more simply in terms of just beauty and less about complexity. So the band I'm thinking about talking about is Genesis. And they are complex, but they're not sort of over the top, virtuoso, show off our virtuosity. Even though they are virtuosos, they really more focus on melody. And as opposed to, say, bands like King Crimson, Yes, ELP, UK, and so forth, all of which are amongst my favorites, progressive rock. But I do appreciate, I've come to really appreciate that Genesis puts on the back burner showing off their chops versus melody, you know. And sidebar about Genesis, I'm not really a big fan of Genesis of today. The Genesis, to me, the core Genesis albums are the albums that are the classic lineup with Peter Gabriel and Steve Hackett and Phil Collins and Tony Banks and Mike Rutherford. That to me is the classic lineup. The step before that, there's a, you know, the Knife is good from the second album. First album, barely listenable. Phil Collins takes over, and that's an interesting story in itself, because who would have thought this amazing progressive drummer was in, you know, Brand X and so forth? Who would have thought that he would have been maybe a better singer in some ways than Peter Gabriel? Different singer. I mean, Peter Gabriel's very dark and edgy in ways that Phil Collins is not. And I think Phil Collins did a fabulous job on the next album, Trick of the Tail. And Wind in the Wuthering's good too. And then there were three that Hackett's left, still, you know, in the right place, you know, but missing Hackett, I think, was unfortunate. And then from there, I'm gone. I do like an occasional song here and there, you know, as I like any fun pop song, but it is just pop music at that point, played by fabulous musicians. But the album I want to talk about right now is an album called Selling England by the Pound. And it's one of my three favorite albums. Well, four, because Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, Nursery Crime, and Foxtrot. A lot of people think Foxtrot is the best of them. And then Trick of the Tail is pretty good too. So I don't know which one I like the best of those. You know, they're all fabulous in different ways. So the guitar solos, you probably, if you're Genesis fans and guitar fans, you're going to guess that I'm talking about Firth of Fifth, or Fifth of Firth. I think it's Firth of Fifth. That guitar solo, and first of all, the whole thing, beautiful piano opening that Tony Banks does. He's such a melodic player, and some of the, you know, keyboard stuff he does here in between, fabulous. The flute solos, fabulous. Drumming, of course, is always great with Phil Collins. And then it goes into this guitar solo that's unlike any guitar solo I've ever heard. That guitar solo, like I said, Eddie Van Halen was very much influenced, admittedly, to that tapping technique that Steve Hackett did, what he was doing long before Eddie Van Halen. Not to say he was the first to do tapping either. There's plenty of examples that I can dig up and show of guitar players 40s, the 50s, it did tapping well. So it's not, but Eddie, of course, took it to a place, you know, that nobody had taken it to. And I don't think anybody's really, you know, there are other people that have elaborated on top of that and done great jobs, but Eddie is the guy. But anyway, this solo is so beautiful. It just comes out of nowhere. It's so melodic. It's got this cool tone to it. And it's not showing off chops so much, even though there's amazing chops in there in its own way. It's just one of the most beautifully constructed. One of the things I love about good guitar solos, and I really should have included some of Eric Clapton's guitar solos from Layla and the Derek and the Dominos album, because this sort of fits with that too, is a guitar solo that is a mini composition in itself, rather than just some riff thrown in the middle. To me, those are the best ones, you know. And I was just thinking about Randy Rhoads, that guitar solo he does on Mr. Crowley. It's just a little beautiful composition within that piece. That's what this is. It's just this beautiful composition that is very different in its approach and its phrasing than anybody else I'd ever heard. And it is haunting. I think that's the best description of it. It's a haunting guitar solo that, if you haven't heard it, really, really great. My second guitar solo is from my absolute favorite guitar player in the whole world. Number one, on every level, I believe. You know, no one guitarist has it all. You know, some are melodic, but not great on technique. Some have great technique, but are sort of stiff. And I like different guitarists for different reasons. Like guys like Fripp, who are kind of interesting and mathematical, and you know, and then the guys like Santana are so soulful and bluesy. You know, if I had to name one guy that comes close to really checking off all the boxes, technical, emotional, original, melts your face, but then sucks you in, and thoughtful, and doesn't pander. And that's one of the things I really like about this guitar player. He does not pander. I think, you know, I can't stand these guys that throw the guitar around, and, you know, even the whole, you know, with the teeth thing. If you're good, you don't need to do all that nonsense and wear leather and all this. Just, you know, and that was another thing I liked about this guy. He was the ballsiest, hottest motherfucker playing I could think of, and yet he didn't look like it. And I'm not talking about Reverend Fripp. I'm talking about another guy with short hair, conservatively dressed. I'm not talking about John McLaughlin. John McLaughlin, that band changed my life in terms of appreciating music of a different sort. I found this album, or I think maybe I had heard my brother playing this album, and I thought it was the weirdest shit I'd ever heard. That time I was listening to Jimi Hendrix, and I was listening to Grateful Dead, Jefferson Airplane, The Who, maybe some Stones. Listened to good stuff, but it wasn't, I don't know, anything cutting edge. Well, maybe Hendrix. Which I didn't include in this list, by the way. I feel bad. So I'll have to do another top 10, whatever, 10 favorites. Throw some Hendrix in there, because, good Lord, he's the guy. But to me, John McLaughlin is really the guy. So I heard this album. It was a live album called Between Nothingness and Eternity. And my brother was gone, and I put it on the stereo, and I turned up the stereo loud, and this thing was crazy. It was nothing like it before. It was like heavy metal jazz before heavy metal existed. The highs and the lows, and the power, and then it would drop down, and then it would come back up, and then there would be little interludes in between, and it took you on this path. And, you know, a lot of jazz doesn't really take you on a path. It's sort of more circular and so forth, and improvisational and looser. This stuff was very structured, which I wasn't used to. And I wasn't really much of a jazz fan then. Not even totally sure I'm that much of a jazz fan even now. And which is why I always sort of gravitate more to fusion, because I like that more sort of structure that fusion and progressive rock tends to offer. So this had all of that. But man, the guitar solo, those guitar solos were, wow. I mean, sorry, Hendrix you're great, but McLaughlin, just explosive and brilliant and unique and wow. I don't even know if I need to really explain it. You've got to listen to it. However, that album, Between Nothingness and Eternity, and for you Mahavishnu fans, was the first, well, I guess, stage of Mahavishnu Orchestra, the first lineup, which was the definitive one in most people's minds, and probably accurately so. But my favorite guitar solo from the Mahavishnu Orchestra came from the second lineup, which in many ways was every bit the equal to the first one. And I could get into I could spend the next 10 minutes explaining how they compare in terms of lineups. Great. Particularly because of the violinist they brought in, Jean-Luc Ponty, who I really preferred to the first violinist, Jerry Goodman, who was great too. So there's a piece on there, second piece on there, called Lila's Dance, and it's on an album called Visions of the Emerald Beyond. John McLaughlin was a very spiritual guy, was into Indian religion, which then kind of, you could hear in the music, there's a lot of Indian influence in this music. This music is, like I said, it's like heavy metal, jazz, a lot of rock, but a lot of Indian influence, and a lot of other things too. But again, for another day, when I could spend a whole, show on Mahavishnu. But there's a guy out there named Andy Edwards who's far more knowledgeable than me, that is the biggest Mahavishnu fan in the world, I think, who did a far better job than I could ever do on explaining Mahavishnu. This is my shout out in case Andy ever sees it. I sometimes comment on his videos, so I feel a little bit of a kinship, even though he probably doesn't know who I am. Anyway, this solo on this song, Lila's Dance, lights out. It's, one of the things I like about John McLaughlin, he's one of the fastest guitar players I'd ever heard, at least at that time. Since then, there are guitars that have come along that are, like machine guns and so forth. I think the difference wasn't just playing some scale and learning, some of these guys, I think they just sit down, for, tens of years, learning to play these scales real fast, and then they just mix and match and put them wherever they can. McLaughlin's playing these complex melodies incredibly fast. I don't really think those other guys are quite doing that. That, I think, is a lot harder than just playing some, thing you've learned from practicing, where you just throw it in here and throw it in there, I don't know, like I saw a video of Yngwie live, and Yngwie's amazing sometimes, but I guess this is when he turned fat and kind of run out of ideas, and it seemed like he was just doing the same run over and over and over again. I was so fucking bored, But anyway, McLaughlin, I'm never bored, Sometimes he takes some turns down some alleys, and you're like, I don't know. I'm so used to this thing that you're doing, and now you're going here, and it takes me a while to adjust to that. It took me a while to adjust to Shakti, which was this acoustic Indian band he did after the success of this Mahavishnu Orchestra, which was like huge. Probably the biggest jazz band in terms of sales and box office tickets that's ever existed. I mean, they were like a major rock band almost. And then, something like Shakti comes along after the success of this other thing, and it takes a while to get used to it, and then you go, wow, that's fucking brilliant too. So check out Shakti if you get a chance. Great stuff. Anyway, Lila's Dance. This solo, I'm not a religious guy, I'm not even really a spiritual guy. One thing I hear in John McLaughlin's guitar playing, particularly during the Mahavishnu Orchestra, and I don't know how I can tell, but I can tell that he is possessed with spiritualism. And you could hear in that guitar solo that he is just like, it's like he's looking up to God and just, or whatever it is he's looking up to. And it's just coming out there's so much inspiration that really does feel, and I know it sounds sort of hokey and cliche, but it really does feel like there's a spiritualism in there. Anyway, third solo on my list here. Again, this was just a list I put together top of my head. This is the first solo I ever heard that made me go, wow. You know, I was always like just into music as its own entity and not that focused so much on the solos when I was younger, you know, 10, 12, whatever it was. And then I think I heard this when I was about 15 or something like that. And I heard this solo I heard on the radio. And for many years, it was my favorite guitar solo. And I don't think I'm the only one. It was a solo called Europa by Carlos Santana. And this thing, it's bluesy, but not in the, it's soulful. It's bluesy, not in a traditional bluesy, you know, sense, you know, but in a soulful sense. And it's got these long sustains, and it builds, and it drops down, and it builds again, and it climaxes. And I love climaxes in music, you know. What can I say about climaxes? Let's not go there. Anyway, but it's a very satisfying thing, and I don't mean that in a perverse sense. I mean, not in a perverse. I don't mean that in a sexual sense, although that's true too. But when music hits a climax, that's very exciting and builds and builds and builds and builds, and then hits this thing. You know, good example of a climax to me, guitar playing maybe, Neil Sean playing "Look Into the Future." From the old Journey stuff, this Journey stuff that was fusiony before Steve Perry came along, and he builds this thing along, and then it just explodes. You know, or Michael Schenker, Love to Love, you know, and it's you know, building and building and building. At the end, the thing just climaxes. You know, Stairway to Heaven, another example of that climax that, you know, just. And even though I don't think that the guitar playing on that Stairway to Heaven, you know, is that amazing, God, I'm going to piss off a lot of people. I love Jimmy Page, and I love Led Zeppelin. I love what he does on that. But it's the climax that makes that solo so amazing, you know. Same thing with the way that Santana builds towards that climax in Europa. Fantastic. Okay, we got to keep moving. Okay, I'm looking at it now. Number 4. I was actually kind of inspired. This is a guitar player that he's the guitar player's guitar player. He's the guitarist that if you ask a bunch of guitar players that are really good, you know, the Satrianis, the Yngwies, and all that, who's the best guitarist besides yourself? This is the guy they would all say, and I think you know who I'm about to talk about. And I was actually a little inspired by, I'll give a shout out to Rick Beato. I hope I said that right. Love his show. All those guys, by the way, you know, all those YouTube guys, you know, Sea of Tranquility, Andy Edwards, Ken Tamplin, Rick Beato, Music is Wind. These guys are great. They're way better than me, so just listen to them. No, but anyway, but maybe I have something else. Rick Beato did a video on, I think he called it the most difficult guitar solo of all time or something like that, and it kind of inspired me because I love this guy. I've seen him in concert so many times. First time I saw him, and I'm talking about Alan Holdsworth, of course. First time I saw him, I never heard of him before, and I went to see Al Di Meola, another one of my favorites. And the opening act was a band called UK, and they were astounding. Never heard of them before. I mean, wow, Wetton on bass and vocals, and Bruford on drums, and, you know, incredible keyboard and violin playing, and then Holdsworth, you know. Eddie Jobson, by the way, was the keyboard and violinist. Old age, I don't know, takes a toll on your memory sometimes. Wow. And, I'm there to see Al Di Meola, who at that time was probably in everybody's minds critically the best guitarist, around. And then there's a guy in the opening act nobody's ever heard of that is maybe even more amazing. So since then I've been a Holdsworth fan, and, Eddie, of course, was the hugest Holdsworth fan, and, everybody, McLaughlin, Sean, everybody recognizes him as just an insanely good guitar player. doesn't sound like anybody else. Sounds like he's blowing a saxophone or something like that. I don't even, the solo that Rick was talking about, and I think after listening to it, I would have to agree that it's just one of the most amazing solos of all time. It's called from a song off an album called Secrets, and the piece of music called City Nights. And if you want to hear a guitar solo, unlike any other guitar solo that you'll never be able to play, because trust me, you could probably learn to play Eruption. You could probably learn to play, Rock Bottom, certainly Smoke Blow in the Water, Days of the Fuse, whatever it is. Most of these things, if you put enough time into, you'll learn. You don't try to learn City Nights by Alan Hoser, because you'll give up your life. You won't have, you'll lose your girlfriend or a wife, and you'll abandon your children. You'll just spend every waking minute trying to get that solo, and you'll never will. And then you'll die. So don't do it. All right. Next one, this isn't even a guitar solo so much. It's just a piece of music with great guitar playing in it. And I don't even know if this is the best example of this guy. I just love this piece of music, and I love this guitar player. And it's, I mentioned already that I like Al Di Meola, Paco, that's coming up further down the list, and John McLaughlin. Well, this guy, one time I saw him opening for those three guys when they were doing their trios, and he held his own. He went out and then played with them and held his own, and then some. Talk about Steve Morse from the Dixie Dregs. Later on, they changed the name to the Dregs. And I think my favorite album of theirs is called Dregs of the Earth. And this song is just, I love it more for its composition than anything else. It's just this beautifully, I wish there was more of this kind of construction of music, that it's just this, like a classical master had put this song together. It's called Hereafter. And the guitar solo is fabulous throughout it. The playing is fabulous throughout. These guys, I think they're the closest thing to the Mahavishnu Orchestra in a weird way than any other band I can think of. Partly because they have violinists as well, but there's definitely some references to Mahavishnu there. And I'll come back to Mahavishnu throughout this thing, because a lot of these artists were influenced by Mahavishnu. So if you haven't heard the Mahavishnu, get into it, because it's brilliant. Anyway, so listen to Hereafter, listen to Steve Morse playing it. It's a fabulous piece of music. Buy the whole album. There's not a bad song on this album. It's all instrumental, which I dig. It's prog rock, I guess. All I know is that in the record stores at the time, this was located in the rock section. But I'd say in a weird way, it's closer to fusion jazz than it is to prog rock. But it's got that sort of episodic quality like Genesis and so forth that prog rock has. So if you're scared of jazz, this album won't scare you. And I understand why you prefer scared jazz. Jazz is a little hard to get into sometimes. I love it because sometimes I just want my brain to be like stimulated, and I don't want it to be made too easy for me, and so I sort of enjoy that sometimes. And then so other times I just like want something simpler that, like the Stones or something like that, which is fabulous too. And by the way, there's no Stones on here because I don't think any of their guitar solos quite are at this level. Although there's some great stuff by Mick Taylor, who by far and away best guitarist the Stones ever had. At least the most melodic. I mean, Keith, of course, writes this incredible riffs, but he's not much of a guitar player. I do like the way the Stones weave the two guitar players in and out of each other. That is friggin' cool, and they write some of the best rock songs of anybody. So if it works, it works, and you shouldn't try to overanalyze why it works. If it works, it means they're doing something right, and they definitely are, even if they're not virtuosos. Anyway, again, digressing, Hereafter, the album Dregs of the Earth, Dixie Dregs, Steve Morse. Right. Number 6. Again, these were just off the top of my head. Really should listen, something by Van Halen. I've always said that the 3 most influential rock guitar players in my mind are pretty clear in chronological order. Chuck Berry basically reinvented guitar playing. Then along comes Jimi Hendrix. There was nothing like it before Jimi Hendrix. You could compare him to today's guitar players and maybe criticize, but at that time, it was like a revolution of guitar playing. Bombastic, over the top, just wow. You know. And now you hear, since then, you hear Hendrix and Robin Trower, in Uli John Roth, in, you know, so many guitar players that to be able to pass along that influence like that, you know, wow. That was, you know, that's Jimmy. Well, I think the next guy along who did the same thing that Chuck Berry and Jimi Hendrix did was Eddie Van Halen. So I have to include what I have to admit. I don't listen to that much Van Halen. I love him, but there's other stuff I probably listen to more for whatever reason. And you know, like I didn't used to listen to Genesis. Now I listen to Genesis all the time. It's always evolving and changing, you know. So the one, at least the one that I'm always enjoy the most is the solo he does on Ice Cream Man. I'm guessing for hardcore Van Halen fans, you could probably dig up stuff that's maybe better. It's just the one I know the most of and always dug. And I'm not going to say it's his best solo. I don't know. I'm just not as versed in Eddie's playing as a lot of you are. You know, McLaughlin, yes. Eddie, a little bit less so. I mean, but I love a lot of his stuff. Spanish Fly, wow. I remember they played that in a blindfold testing, blindfold thing with John McLaughlin, and they played it for him, and he was like, "Who the hell is that?" You know, that guy's incredible. And he said, "It's Eddie Van Halen." And he goes, "Oh, never heard of him." And then, of course, over the years, McLaughlin has come to say that he's gotten to know his playing very well and thinks he's genius. So he's not an arrogant guy. So anyway, let's move on. Let's take another turn in a different direction because I do like a lot of jazz. One guy that is truly a jazz guitar player who I really get, whose phrasing I hear it and know it's him, is Pat Metheny. I love his playing. Is something he doesn't. He's a very different player from someone like John McLaughlin, who, you know, his chops are right in your face. Pat Metheny has fabulous chops, but it's a little more subtle. I love his phrasing, and there's something very identifiable about his phrasing. And the first album I ever bought of Pat Metheny's was an album called American Garage. And I don't even know if it's my favorite album. I think Bright Sides Live is fabulous. There's a number of other ones. And he goes anywhere from sort of a fusion thing to very much traditional kind of jazz. But I really like this album, American Garage. And the first two tracks in particular, really just beautiful melodies and so forth. And, you know, like I said, that's one of the reasons I love Genesis. It's just more about melody than anything else. And I've come to appreciate that more and more in my old age. And Pat Metheny had these beautiful melodies. And the song, Let Me Look Down, on this album, American Garage, this song, Airstream. It's just this very simple melody at first, and then he builds it and takes it in interesting places and so forth. It's just really pretty. And so, again, in no particular order, that's my number 7, you know. And tomorrow, I'll have a different number 10. But let's go with these. Number 8 is one of my rock guitar god characters for me. Got a kind of a mystique to him and doesn't sell out and, you know, didn't try to be, you know, the fastest, most complicated guitar player. But he has great chops. But I really feel it's more about taste than anything else, and that's Michael Schenker. I haven't really liked that much of his stuff since he left, went on his own. I like the stuff he did with UFO. He's got a lot of great stuff. Like I said, so tasteful, you know, Rock Bottom and, you know, Natural Thing and, you know, the list goes on and on. Love to Love, Lights Out. The one I picked here is not my favorite song, and I think it's going to surprise everybody, but there was something very simple and beautiful in the playing that just captured the essence of Michael Schenker. I don't really think it's the best UFO thing by far. It's a piece called Try Me. I don't remember what album it's on. I think it might have been Phenomenon or something like that. It was one of the middle albums before Schenker left. But that guitar solo, he just jumps on it after this very sort of slow, almost ballady kind of piece. And he jumps on this thing, and it's just the epitome of taste and shows you just what a beautiful player he is. So, yeah, if you get a chance, listen to some UFO with Michael Schenker. They've got some great stuff after Michael Schenker left, too. Vinnie Moore is a fabulous player. I've seen him live. Great player, but, start with this one. Start with some UFO with Michael Schenker. Those first 4 albums or so, 5 albums, all the way through Obsession. Those are incredible. Okay. Number 9 is the man I think is not only one of the most unique players and most original and interesting player, but it almost doesn't matter what it is he plays. He's one of these guys that, he could play, and which is why he doesn't really compose that much. He tends to play a lot of covers because it sort of just doesn't matter. They're just vehicles he doesn't have a singer, and that's Jeff Beck. Jeff Beck, saw him years ago. Truthfully, the earlier stuff, with Rod Stewart and all that, and Yardbirds, didn't really ever blow me away. For some reason, just didn't resonate with me. It's the later stuff. Jeff Beck was influenced by the Mahavishnu Orchestra. See, we'll keep coming back to the Mahavishnu Orchestra. And that's when it changed for the better for me. And the album Blow by Blow, which I then think was followed by Wired, and then that was followed by There and Back, and then there have been a number of other ones. Something, Jeff Beck's Garage or something like that. Very fusiony, great musicians, a lot of times musicians that had been in the Mahavishnu Orchestra would play with Jeff Beck. He was trying to capture some of that. He's obviously not a fast guitar player the way John is. It's an interesting thing. I was watching Rick Beato, give him another shout out, and he was saying, defining a guitar virtuoso, and, saying, Jimmy Page and Santana, these guys are not virtuosos, but they're great players. Jimi Hendrix, not a virtuoso. John McLaughlin, Al Di Meola, Alan Holdsworth, virtuosos. Pretty much agree with them. And you could almost sort of say the virtuosos are the fast guys and the non-fast guys and the non-virtuosos. That's sort of way it almost did come out. And then as he was going through the list of guitar players, he mentioned Jeff Beck. And I saw him hesitate. Like, what category do I put him in? Because he's not fast. He doesn't have those kind of speedy Al Di Meola kind of chops or Yngwie Malmsteen. He can't. He doesn't even want to, I don't think. And he hesitated and goes, virtuoso. What he does with his hands is so different, and I know he was inspired by Mark Knopfler to switch from pick to fingerstyle. But there's so much more going on, the way he swells that volume knob and cradles that whammy bar and, works just great. All those little subtleties that he does to just make something that nobody else could make, And I will say this about Jeff Beck before I move on. And the piece I was going to list is Because We've Ended as Lovers. And it's just beautifully done. And the last thing I'll say is the piece I particularly like to listen to of that song is from his performance he did live at Ronnie Scott's. And I think to truly get Jeff Beck, you need to watch that video. It's on YouTube. Jeff Beck live at Ronnie Scott's. Because Jeff Beck I think he's at his best live because it's scripted, but it's not really that scripted. He makes up so much as he goes. And so I think, it's all in the moment. more than just about anybody I could think of. And so you're just sort of holding your breath, just, wow, what's he going to do? You don't know, and he doesn't know. And that's true of a lot of guitars, but Jeff Beck more than anybody I can think of. It's just like he's creating on the spot in such a unique way, and that's why live performances are really his place. And that performance, what's amazing to me about that performance is I think he's like late 60s, maybe even early 70s in age. But I truly believe I saw him 40 years earlier, and I don't think he was as good 40 years ago as he is today. I can't think of any other guitarist ever who got that much better in his old age than he was when he was younger. And that's Jeff Beck. Incredible. Has to be on anybody's essential guitar playing list. The last one is, again, I don't know if I can call this a guitar solo because the whole thing is just guitar soloing. And it's two of my absolute favorite guitarists. It's on an album called Elegant Gypsy, Al Di Meola, and Paco de Lucia. These guys, if you just want to hear virtuosity, these guys are just, wow, great players. Yes, they're fast, but they're also very melodic and beautiful, and their phrasing and, their technique is, I love Al Di Meola, the way he mutes the strings as he's playing sometimes, and how, he's just, people criticize Di Meola as being too much of a technician and so forth. And sometimes I think that might be true, but other times he proves you wrong, that he is a fabulous friggin' guitar player. And that takes me back to what I was talking about, that concert, which was Al Di Meola, Paco de Lucia, and John McLaughlin, the three of them together. Wow. And there's another version of that without Al Di Meola that includes Larry Coryell. It's equally, he's a very underrated guitar player if you ever get a chance. He's a jazz player. He's a legend, Larry Coryell. A real pioneer in the fusion world, along with John McLaughlin. But this piece of music, Mediterranean, it's one of those things where you listen over. You finish with it, play it again. You play it again, you play it again, you play it again. You can't stop because it's so beautiful, And even people that don't like complicated music, even for them, it's beautiful. And so that's rare, right? Mediterranean and Sundance, those two guys playing together, gotta listen to it. I'd give you some honorable mentions, but I probably shouldn't. I probably should move on. Anything Ritchie Blackmore does, love his phrasing, love the way he uses the whammy bar. He just accents a little bit. Uli John Roth, oh my God, that guy